Under the cold white lights of a hospital corridor, Daniel Hayes placed the divorce papers into Sabrina Washington's hands as their son sat silent in a wheelchair beside her. Doctors paused. Nurses watched. He didn't lower his voice. He called her a burden. He called their disabled child a life he refused to carry. Sabrina didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him, her phone still glowing faintly in her palm, with a message he would never expect. Daniel walked away believing he had just freed himself. He had no idea what she had just inherited. If you believe silence can be more powerful than revenge, stay with this story until the end. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if stories like this speak to you, consider subscribing. You may want to see what happens next. Sabrina Washington had learned over the years that silence was rarely empty. It was a container. It held memory pattern and truth long before it revealed any of them. 8 years earlier, when she first met Daniel Hayes, he had been a man in motion. Not successful yet, not established, but moving with a kind of restless certainty that made others believe success would follow him eventually. He had spoken quickly, dreamed loudly, and promised often. Sabrina had not interrupted him then either. She had simply listened. Back then, she had still carried the last name Washington as something heavy, something that opened doors she no longer wished to walk through. She had already stepped away from her father's world, from the quiet power that surrounded Robert Washington's name in financial circles across New York and Chicago. She had chosen something else. Or perhaps more accurately, she had chosen someone else. Daniel had never fully understood what she had walked away from. He knew her father was wealthy. He did not know the scale. He never asked the questions that would have revealed it. And Sabrina never volunteered the answers. In the early years of their marriage, it had not seemed to matter. They lived in a modest apartment in Denver, far from the polished offices and private boardrooms Sabrina had grown up around. Daniel worked long hours, first as a junior analyst, then slowly climbing into management. Sabrina handled everything else. She managed their finances with precision that appeared effortless. She tracked expenses, negotiated contracts, and quietly corrected mistakes Daniel never realized he had made. When Daniel received his first promotion, he credited timing. When the second came faster than expected, he called it momentum. By the third, he began to believe it was entirely his own doing. Sabrina did not correct him. Then Ethan was born. The delivery had been long complicated in ways that no one had predicted during the earlier months. There were words used in the hospital that Daniel did not repeat afterward. Words about nerve damage, words about mobility, words that shifted the future into something less certain, more structured, more demanding. Ethan did not walk when other children did. He did not run. His legs responded differently, unpredictably. Doctors spoke in careful tones about long-term therapy, about adaptive equipment, about patience. Sabrina listened. She asked questions. She took notes. Daniel stood beside her, hands in his pockets, nodding at intervals as though agreement alone could solve the problem. In the first year, he tried. There were appointments he attended, evenings he stayed home. But slowly, almost invisibly, his presence began to thin. Work became the explanation. Meetings stretched longer. Business trips appeared more frequently. His phone, once left face up on the kitchen counter, began to stay in his hand or turn face down when he set it aside. Sabrina noticed. She noticed the way his tone changed when he said certain names. She noticed how quickly he stepped out of rooms to take calls. She noticed that his shirts carried a faint trace of a perfume she did not own. She did not ask him about it. Instead, she began to watch more closely. There was a pattern to everything Daniel did. He believed himself unpredictable, but he wasn't. He checked his messages at the same intervals. He left the house at slightly earlier times on certain mornings. His calendar, when he forgot to lock it, showed blocks of time labeled vaguely but repeating with quiet consistency. Sabrina did not confront him because confrontation would have ended the observation. And she was not finished observing. At home, her life narrowed around Ethan. Mornings began with careful routines, adjustments to braces, gentle exercises taught by physical therapists, encouragement spoken in a tone that never rose too high, never suggested frustration, even when progress slowed. Ethan learned to read early. He learned to watch people. He understood in ways children often do, without being told that his mother carried more than she showed. "Are you tired?" he asked her once, his voice small but precise. Sabrina paused, adjusting the strap on his brace before answering. "Sometimes," she said. "But it doesn't change what we do next." He seemed to accept that. Daniel was not present for that conversation. He was rarely present for the smaller ones. Instead, he appeared at the edges of their days. Late dinners, short acknowledgments, a hand on Ethan's shoulder that lingered just long enough to suggest effort before withdrawing again. Sabrina noticed something else during those months. Not just absence, but irritation. It surfaced in small ways at first. A sigh when appointments ran long. A tightening of his jaw when Ethan struggled with something simple. A glance at his watch that came too quickly. One evening, when Ethan dropped a glass and it shattered across the kitchen floor, Daniel reacted before Sabrina could speak. "This can't keep happening," he said sharply. The room went still. Ethan froze, his hands trembling slightly as he looked down at the broken pieces. Sabrina stepped forward, her movements calm, deliberate. She knelt not to pick up the glass immediately, but to meet Ethan's eyes. "It's just a glass," she said quietly. "We clean it, that's all." Daniel didn't respond. He had already turned away, already reaching for his phone. That moment stayed with Sabrina. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was clear. After that, the changes accelerated. Daniel began staying overnight on what he called extended meetings. He updated his wardrobe. New suits, sharper cuts, colors he had never chosen before. His reflection in mirrors lingered longer. Sabrina did not ask where the changes came from. She documented them instead. A receipt left in a jacket pocket. A hotel charge that didn't match the city he claimed to be in. A calendar entry that shifted at the last minute. None of it was proof on its own. Together it formed something more complete. Still, she said nothing. Silence for Sabrina was not avoidance. It was timing. By the time the name Laya Monroe appeared in Daniel's messages, Sabrina already understood what she would find. Lila was not saved under her full name at first, just an initial. Then a variation. Then eventually, nothing at all, messages left unsaved, but frequent enough to stand out. Sabrina read them only once. She did not need to read them again. After that, she stopped looking at his phone entirely. She no longer needed confirmation. She had already seen enough to understand the direction everything was moving. What interested her more was how far Daniel was willing to go. That answer revealed itself gradually. He stopped attending Ethan's therapy sessions completely. When asked, he deflected. "I have responsibilities," he said one evening, his tone edged with something sharper than before. "I can't be everywhere." Sabrina nodded as if she accepted that explanation. But she adjusted something internally at that moment. From that point on, she stopped expecting him to return to what he had been. Instead, she began preparing for what he was becoming. She organized documents. Not dramatically, not all at once. Quietly, methodically. Financial statements were copied and stored. Account histories reviewed. Joint assets noted. She created records of dates, times, and interactions, not for confrontation, but for clarity. Ethan remained at the center of everything. At night, after he slept, Sabrina would sit at the small desk in the corner of their living room, the light low, her movements precise. She wrote less than she observed, but what she wrote was exact. Daniel never asked what she was doing. He assumed it was routine, household management, something small. He underestimated her because he had grown used to doing so, that more than anything else would matter later. One evening, as autumn settled over the city and the air turned sharp enough to change the rhythm of their days, Sabrina noticed something new. Daniel smiled at his phone. It was not a casual expression. It was intentional, focused, directed at someone who was not in the room. Sabrina watched from across the table, her expression unchanged. She did not need to know what message he was reading. She already understood who it was from. Ethan looked between them, sensing something without fully grasping it. "Are we still going to the appointment tomorrow?" he asked. Sabrina answered before Daniel could. "Yes," she said, "we are." Daniel didn't look up. That too, Sabrina noted. Not because it surprised her, but because it confirmed with quiet certainty that whatever remained of their marriage existed only in form, not in substance. And Sabrina had already begun preparing for the moment when even that form would disappear. She just hadn't shown anyone yet. The name Laya Monroe did not arrive in Sabrina Washington's life with drama. It entered quietly, the way most consequential things did, disguised at first as something insignificant. Sabrina first saw it on a Thursday afternoon, reflected faintly in the dark screen of Daniel's phone as he set it down on the kitchen counter. He had stepped away to take a call, something he had begun doing more frequently. His voice lowered just enough to suggest privacy, without admitting it outright. The notification had been brief. A single line, a name that did not belong to any colleague Sabrina recognized. "It says Lila." There had been no last name attached then, no context, just the kind of familiarity that suggested it didn't need one. Sabrina did not pick up the phone. She did not unlock it. She didn't need to. The way Daniel returned too quickly, too casually, told her more than any message could have. He flipped the phone face down. He hadn't done that before. That was the first confirmation. After that, everything else aligned. Laya Monroe worked in Daniel's company, though not in a position that would typically place her in direct contact with him. She was part of the marketing division, a mid-level strategist who had joined the firm less than a year earlier. Her background, when Sabrina later reviewed it, was efficient rather than exceptional. A series of calculated career moves, companies that led upward but never deeply rooted. She understood momentum. That much was clear. Daniel began mentioning the marketing department more often, though never Lila directly. Projects that required cross-team collaboration. Meetings that extended beyond their expected scope. Late nights justified by timelines that always seemed just slightly out of reach. Sabrina listened. She noted the shifts in language, the way certain phrases repeated the subtle changes in Daniel's tone when he spoke about work. There was a brightness there now, a renewed energy that had not been present in months. It did not belong to his career. It belonged to something else. The first time Sabrina saw Lila in person was not planned. It happened at a company event Daniel had insisted Sabrina attend. A quarterly celebration held in a polished downtown venue, all glass and soft lighting designed to reflect success in ways that felt effortless. Sabrina had worn a simple dress, nothing that drew attention, nothing that suggested anything beyond quiet presence. Ethan had stayed with a caregiver for the evening, a decision Sabrina made without consulting Daniel. He had barely noticed. The room had been filled with conversations, layered over one another, laughter that rose and fell in practiced waves. Daniel moved through it easily, shaking hands, accepting compliments, positioning himself carefully within each interaction. Sabrina observed from a distance. And then she saw her. Laya Monroe stood near the center of the room, her posture angled slightly toward Daniel, even when he wasn't directly beside her. She wore confidence the way others wore formal attire, deliberately, with an awareness of how it would be perceived. She was younger than Sabrina had expected. Not dramatically so, but enough that the contrast registered immediately. When Daniel approached her, the shift in his demeanor was subtle, but unmistakable. He leaned in slightly, his voice lowered. His smile sharpened into something more focused, more specific. Lila responded in kind. They did not touch, not in a way that would draw attention. But proximity, Sabrina knew, could communicate more than contact ever could. Sabrina did not move closer. She did not interrupt. She simply watched. At one point, Daniel glanced across the room and met Sabrina's gaze. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in his expression, recognition perhaps, or awareness. But it passed quickly, replaced by the same controlled confidence he carried everywhere else. He did not come over. That too was a decision. Later, when the event ended and they returned home, Daniel spoke about the evening in general terms: success, growth, future opportunities. He did not mention Lila. Sabrina did not ask. Instead, she focused on what had changed. Daniel's absence from home became more structured after that night. It was no longer unpredictable. It followed a rhythm. Certain evenings were consistently unavailable. Certain weekends partially occupied. There were patterns in the locations he mentioned, in the routes he took, even in the times he returned. Sabrina mapped them quietly, not on paper at first, but in memory. Later, she would record them with precision, but in the beginning it was enough to understand the shape of it. Ethan noticed the changes as well, though he did not have the language to describe them. "Is Dad working again?" he asked one evening, as Sabrina adjusted the supports on his wheelchair. "Yes," she said. "Does he like working more than being here?" Sabrina paused, her hands stilling for just a moment. "He likes different things right now," she replied carefully. Ethan considered that. Will it stay like that? Sabrina resumed her movements, securing the final strap before answering. "Not forever," she said. She did not elaborate. The truth was, she already knew it wouldn't. What she did not say was that the change would not come from Daniel. It would come from something else, entirely. Weeks passed. Daniel's behavior grew less cautious. The careful distance he had maintained at the company event began to erode. He referenced Lila in conversation now, though indirectly. The marketing lead suggested a new approach, he said one evening. "She's been pushing for changes in the campaign structure. She has good instincts." Sabrina noted the pronoun. She did not respond. There was a shift happening in Daniel that extended beyond the affair itself. It was not just that he was involved with someone else. It was that he had begun to redefine his life around that involvement. His priorities adjusted. Time that once belonged to family was reallocated without acknowledgement. Responsibilities that had been shared were now assumed to be Sabrina's alone. When Ethan's therapy schedule required adjustments, Daniel deferred. "You handle it," he said. "You always do." It was not said as a compliment. It was said as a dismissal. Sabrina accepted it without visible reaction. But internally, she marked the transition. From that point on, she stopped expecting participation from him entirely. Instead, she structured everything as if she were already alone. Appointments were scheduled without consulting Daniel. Financial decisions were made within the limits available to her. Ethan's care became a system she refined, continuously removing any dependency on Daniel's involvement. This was not an emotional response. It was practical. At the same time, Sabrina began to expand her observations. The financial irregularities she had noticed earlier became clearer. Transfers between accounts that did not align with known expenses. Payments that appeared structured to avoid attention. Patterns that suggested not just personal involvement, but financial entanglement. Lila was not just present in Daniel's life. She was becoming integrated into it. Sabrina accessed records carefully, never leaving traces of what she reviewed. Years of managing household finances had given her familiarity with systems Daniel assumed she did not fully understand. That assumption worked in her favor. She copied what she needed. She stored it where it could not be easily found. And she waited. One evening, as winter began to edge into the city and the nights lengthened, Daniel returned home later than usual. There was a different energy in his movements, less caution, more certainty. He did not avoid Sabrina when he entered. Instead, he paused in the doorway of the living room, watching her for a moment, as she sat beside Ethan, reading quietly. "We need to talk," he said. Sabrina closed the book, marking the page with a small, deliberate motion. Ethan looked up. About what, he asked. Daniel hesitated just briefly before answering. "Grown-up things," he said. Sabrina met his gaze, her expression unchanged. "Then we'll talk later," she replied calmly. Daniel seemed to consider arguing, then decided against it. He nodded once and stepped back. But something had shifted. Not in Sabrina, in him. He was preparing to move from concealment to declaration. And Sabrina, already aware of the direction he was heading, did not attempt to stop him. She did not need to. Because by the time Daniel spoke the truth aloud, Sabrina would already be far ahead of it. She had been from the beginning. He just hadn't realized it yet. Before Sabrina Washington became the quiet center of a shrinking household, before she learned to measure time through therapy sessions and careful routines, she had belonged to a world that operated on a very different scale. It was not a world she spoke about. Even in the early days of her marriage, when Daniel still asked questions out of curiosity rather than calculation, she had answered selectively. Not with lies, but with omissions so clean they left no trace of what had been left out. Her father, Robert Washington, had not been a man easily summarized. To the public, he was an investor. To those who worked within his orbit, he was something closer to a force, quiet, precise, and capable of altering the direction of entire companies without ever appearing in the room. He did not build things in visible ways. He acquired them, restructured them, moved capital in patterns that only revealed themselves long after the outcomes had already been secured. Sabrina had grown up watching that. Not from the center, but from the edges. Robert Washington did not invite participation. He expected observation. Understanding was something she developed on her own. Piecing together fragments of conversations, studying documents left within reach, learning the language of decisions that were never fully explained. He believed that knowledge, once given too easily, lost its value. So Sabrina learned without asking. Their relationship had never been openly hostile. It had been something more restrained, more controlled. Expectations existed, but they were rarely spoken directly. Choices were presented as opportunities, though Sabrina understood early on that some of them were not truly optional. When she met Daniel Hayes, her father saw him clearly within minutes. "He moves quickly," Robert Washington had said after their first meeting, his tone neutral. Sabrina had recognized the assessment for what it was. Not approval, not disapproval, but classification. "He's building something," she had replied. Her father had studied her for a moment longer than necessary. "Be careful what you choose to build it with," he said. That was the closest he came to warning her. Sabrina married Daniel anyway. The decision did not result in an immediate break, but it shifted the terms of their relationship in ways that became clear over time. Financial support, once assumed, was withdrawn quietly. Invitations became less frequent. Communication narrowed to occasional calls, brief and formal. Robert Washington did not argue with her choice. He simply adjusted around it. Sabrina understood what that meant. If she chose a life outside his structure, she would live it without his resources. She accepted that. The early years with Daniel were not difficult in ways that required regret. They were modest, structured around effort rather than inheritance. Sabrina adapted quickly. She reduced her expectations, recalibrated her understanding of value, and built a life that functioned within the limits they had. She did not miss the world she had left, at least not in ways she allowed herself to acknowledge. When Ethan was born, Sabrina considered reaching out to her father. The thought came during one of the long nights in the hospital when uncertainty pressed in from all directions, and the future felt too large to navigate alone. She had her phone in her hand, his number still saved unchanged. She did not call. It was not pride that stopped her. It was clarity. She knew that if she reached out, then it would not be for connection. It would be for assistance. And Robert Washington did not respond well to needs framed that way, so she put the phone down. She chose to remain where she was. Years passed without significant contact. There were occasional updates, brief messages that acknowledged major events, but did not invite deeper conversation. Robert Washington remained aware of her life just as Sabrina remained aware of his. But the distance between them held. Until it didn't. The first indication that something had changed came not through her father, but through an external source. A missed call. The number was unfamiliar, though the area code placed it in New York. Sabrina noticed it late in the evening after Ethan had fallen asleep and the apartment had settled into its usual quiet. She did not return it immediately. Instead, she waited. If it was important, they would call again. They did. The following morning, the same number appeared on her phone just as she was preparing to leave for Ethan's therapy appointment. This time she answered. Miss Washington. The voice on the other end was measured professional. Yes. My name is Jonathan Cole. I'm calling from Harrison and Cole, LLP. We represent your father, Mr. Robert Washington. Sabrina did not respond immediately. Not because she was surprised, but because she was processing the tone. There was something in it that suggested finality. I see, she said. Is this a convenient time to speak? No. Sabrina replied calmly. But you can tell me why you're calling. There was a brief pause. I'm afraid I can only provide limited information over the phone. It would be best if we arranged a formal meeting. Sabrina considered that. I have a son with a medical appointment in 20 minutes, she said. If this is urgent, you'll tell me now. Another pause. Slightly longer this time. Your father's health has declined significantly in recent weeks, Jonathan Cole said carefully. There are matters that require your attention. The phrasing was deliberate. Sabrina recognized it. Is he asking to see me? She asked. No, Cole replied. But his legal arrangements include provisions that involve you directly. That was enough. I'll review whatever you send, Sabrina said. We've forwarded documentation to your email address on file, he said. Please confirm receipt at your earliest convenience. The call ended shortly after. Sabrina stood still for a moment, her phone still in her hand. Then she moved. Ethan's appointment proceeded as scheduled. She did not allow the call to disrupt the routine. She adjusted his equipment, spoke with the therapist, took notes on his progress. Everything continued as it always did. But the call remained in the background, waiting. When they returned home, Sabrina helped Ethan settle into the living room with a book before moving to the small desk in the corner. Her laptop sat exactly where she had left it the night before. She opened it. The email was already there. Subject line, Washington Estate, immediate attention required. Sabrina read it once, then again. Not because it was complex, but because it was precise. Robert Washington had not reached out personally. He had not requested her presence. Instead, he had arranged everything in advance. The email outlined the initial steps of a process that would unfold regardless of her immediate response. Documentation was attached. Legal language structured carefully to ensure clarity without unnecessary detail. There was no emotional content, no personal message, only instructions. Sabrina closed the laptop. Not because she was finished, but because she understood what the email represented. It was not a request. It was a transition, and transitions in her father's world were never accidental. Across the room, Ethan looked up from his book. "Is everything okay?" he asked. Sabrina met his gaze. "Yes," she said. And in that moment, it was true. Not because nothing had changed, but because everything had. She just hadn't told anyone yet. Daniel Hayes did not choose his timing carefully. He chose it conveniently. The difference mattered, though he did not yet understand how much. 3 days after the call from Harrison and Cole LLP, the atmosphere in the apartment shifted in a way that was no longer subtle. It was not something Sabrina would have missed, even if she had not already been paying attention. Daniel was preparing to leave, not physically, not yet. But the structure of his behavior had changed from concealment to execution. The hesitation that had once defined his actions, those small pauses, the cautious glances, had disappeared. In their place was a directness that suggested he believed the outcome was already decided. Sabrina noticed it in the way he moved through the space. He opened drawers he hadn't touched in months. He reviewed documents that had long been ignored. His phone calls became less guarded, his voice less restrained. He no longer stepped outside to take them. Instead, he spoke from the living room, from the kitchen, from anywhere that suited him. He assumed Sabrina was no longer listening. He was wrong. On the 4th evening after the call, Daniel arrived home earlier than expected. The light outside had not yet faded completely, casting a muted glow through the windows that softened the edges of the room. Ethan sat at the table, working through a set of exercises his therapist had assigned his movements, careful but determined. Sabrina stood nearby, guiding him when necessary, offering quiet corrections without drawing attention to them. Daniel entered without greeting. "I need to speak with you," he said. He did not lower his voice. Sabrina glanced at Ethan, then back at Daniel. "Then wait," she replied evenly. "We're finishing something." Daniel exhaled a sharp, controlled sound that suggested impatience more than anger. But he said nothing further. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching. Ethan finished the exercise slowly. Sabrina gave a small nod. "That's enough for today," she said. "Go rest." Ethan looked between them, sensing the shift in the room. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. Sabrina's expression did not change. "Yes," she said. He nodded, accepting the answer, as he always did, and moved toward his room. When the door closed, Daniel stepped forward. "This isn't working," he said. The words were expected. Sabrina did not respond immediately. "Be specific," she said after a moment. Daniel seemed almost surprised by the request. "Our marriage," he said, as though the clarification were unnecessary. "This situation, it's not sustainable." Sabrina considered him. "Not for you," she said. It was not a question. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "For anyone," he replied. There was a pause. In that space, the weight of what he intended to say next settled into place. It was not a revelation. It was a declaration. "I've met someone," Daniel said. Sabrina did not ask who. She already knew. "It's serious," he continued. "We're building something that makes sense." Sabrina held his gaze. "And this doesn't," she said. Daniel hesitated just briefly. "No," he said. There was no anger in his voice, no attempt to soften the statement, just a straightforward assessment delivered with the same confidence he applied to business decisions. Sabrina nodded once. "Then what do you need?" she asked. The question shifted something. Daniel had expected resistance, emotion, negotiation. What he received instead was clarity. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," he said. "The paperwork is being prepared." It would be better if we handle this efficiently. Efficiently. Sabrina let the words settle. And Ethan, she asked. Daniel's expression changed slightly, though not enough to suggest discomfort. You'll continue to take care of him, he said. That's what you've been doing. That's not what I asked, Sabrina replied. Daniel looked away for a moment, then back. I'll provide support, he said. Within reason. Within reason. Sabrina understood exactly what that meant. What reason, she asked. Daniel's patience thinned. I have responsibilities, he said. New ones. I can't be expected to maintain everything at the same level. Sabrina studied him. Everything she repeated. Daniel didn't answer. The silence stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. For Sabrina, it was confirmation. You've already made your decision, she said. Yes, Daniel replied. Then there's nothing to discuss, she said. The simplicity of the statement seemed to unsettle him more than any argument would have. That's it, he asked. What were you expecting, Sabrina replied. Daniel searched her face for something, anger perhaps, or regret, but found neither. I thought you'd at least try to argue, he said. Sabrina shook her head slightly. No, she said. There was nothing more to add. Daniel shifted his weight, adjusting his stance as though preparing for a different kind of conversation that never came. I'll bring the documents when they're ready, he said finally. Sabrina nodded. Do that. He lingered for a moment longer, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the bedroom. Sabrina remained where she was. The room was quiet again. Nothing had changed externally, and yet everything had. Later that night, after Ethan had gone to sleep and Daniel had settled into a restless pattern of movement, in the other room, Sabrina returned to her desk. She opened her laptop. The email from Harrison and Cole LLP waited unchanged. This time, she did not close it. She reviewed the attachments in detail. Legal documents structured with precision. Asset lists categorized by sector and value. Ownership stakes in companies that extended far beyond what Daniel would have imagined. $800 million was not presented as a number. It was presented as a network, a system. And Sabrina was now positioned at its center. She read through the conditions carefully. There were steps required, verification processes, signatures that would initiate transitions already set in motion. She did not rush. Instead, she cross-referenced. The financial records she had been collecting over the past months were already organized. She began aligning them with the broader structure outlined in the documents. Patterns emerged quickly. Daniel's company, its funding sources, the investors behind it. Names that appeared both in her personal records and in the documents provided by Harrison and Cole. Sabrina paused. Not because the connection was unclear, but because it was exact. Daniel's success had not been independent. It had been supported. Indirectly, quietly, through channels he had never examined closely enough to understand. Sabrina leaned back slightly in her chair. The realization did not surprise her, but it clarified something important. Daniel believed he was leaving from a position of strength. He believed he was choosing a better future. What he did not understand was that the foundation beneath that future did not belong to him. Sabrina closed the laptop, not because she was finished, but because she had seen enough for that night. Across the apartment, the silence deepened. Daniel slept. Ethan slept. And Sabrina, for the first time since the conversation earlier that evening, allowed herself a moment of stillness that was not observation, not preparation, but recognition. The path ahead was no longer uncertain. It had been defined, not by Daniel's decision, but by something much larger, something he had already begun to walk away from without ever realizing what it was. Sabrina stood turning off the light at her desk before moving toward Ethan's room. She paused at the doorway, watching him sleep. His breathing was steady, untroubled. She did not wake him. There would be time for everything else later. For now, what mattered was that nothing in his world needed to change immediately. Because Sabrina would decide when it did. And she would do so without noise, without announcement, without asking for anything in return. Just as she always had. The email from Harrison and Cole LLP did not demand urgency. It assumed it. Sabrina Washington opened it again the following morning at precisely 6:12 a.m. After she had already prepared Ethan's medication and reviewed his schedule for the day. The apartment was quiet, the kind of stillness that existed only before the city began to move. Daniel hadn't returned home the night before. Sabrina did not check where he was. She already knew he would not be where he had said he would be. Instead, she focused on the document in front of her. The subject line had not changed. The language inside had not softened. It was still exact, still measured, still entirely devoid of anything that resembled sentiment. Her father was dead. The sentence appeared once in the third paragraph, framed within legal context rather than personal acknowledgement. Robert Washington passed on date, following a period of declining health. There was no elaboration, no description of his final days, no message left behind. Only the fact. Sabrina read the line once, then moved on. Not because it meant nothing, but because it meant something she had already understood before seeing it written. The call had carried that implication, the tone, the phrasing, the controlled delivery of information that allowed no space for interpretation. She had expected this. What she had not expected was the structure that followed. The estate was not presented as a collection of assets. It was outlined as an operational entity. A network of holdings, investments, controlling interests, and liquid reserves organized across multiple sectors and jurisdictions. Private equity, real estate portfolios, technology investments, healthcare infrastructure. Each category was itemized with precision, accompanied by valuation ranges that shifted slightly depending on market conditions. The total estimate was presented at the end of the document not as a bold statement, but as a calculated sum. $812 million. Sabrina noted the number, not because it overwhelmed her, but because it confirmed the scale. She continued reading. Primary beneficiary, Sabrina Washington. There were no secondary names, no divisions, no conditions that redistributed ownership based on performance or compliance. Everything transferred to her. Completely. The next section outlined the requirements: identity verification, formal acknowledgement of transfer, execution of specific legal documents within a defined time frame. There were clauses related to management structures, advisory boards, and transitional oversight, but none of them limited her authority. They existed to support continuity, not to restrict control. Sabrina read each line carefully. She did not skim. She did not assume. Every word mattered. At 6:38 a.m., she closed the laptop, not because she had finished processing the information, but because she had understood enough to proceed. Across the apartment, Ethan stirred in his room. Sabrina stood moving through the morning routine without interruption. Breakfast was prepared, medication administered, therapy exercises reviewed. Everything continued as it always had. Nothing in her behavior suggested that anything had changed. And yet internally, the structure of her reality had shifted completely. Daniel returned at 9:14 a.m. He entered the apartment with the same confidence he had carried over the past week. His movements unhurried, his expression composed in a way that suggested control. Sabrina was at the table with Ethan, reviewing a set of reading exercises. Daniel paused briefly when he saw them, then continued into the kitchen without greeting. "Morning," he said, his tone casual. Sabrina nodded once. "Morning." Ethan looked up. "Did you sleep at work again?" he asked. Daniel hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Something like that," he replied. He poured himself coffee, leaning against the counter as though the conversation required no further attention. Sabrina did not look at him. She continued guiding Ethan through the exercise. "Read the next line," she said. Ethan complied, his voice steady. Daniel checked his phone. There was no tension in the room. Not from Sabrina, not from Ethan. Only from the absence of what used to be there. At 9:27 a.m., Daniel spoke again. "The lawyer finalized the documents," he said. "I'll bring them tonight." Sabrina turned a page in Ethan's workbook. "Okay," she replied. Daniel waited as though expecting more. There was nothing else. He exhaled, a subtle shift in his posture, indicating something close to irritation. "This doesn't have to be complicated," he said. "It isn't," Sabrina replied. Their eyes met briefly. Daniel seemed to search for resistance again, for any sign that she intended to challenge him. He found none. That unsettled him more than he would admit. "Good," he said finally. He finished his coffee and left. Sabrina listened to the sound of the door closing. Then she returned her full attention to Ethan. By midday, she had made her first call. Not to Daniel, not to anyone within her immediate circle, but to the number listed at the bottom of the email. Harrison and Cole, LLP. Jonathan Cole answered on the second ring. "Miss Washington." His tone had not changed. "I've reviewed the documents," Sabrina said. There was no introduction, no preamble. "I assumed you would," he replied. "I'll proceed with the verification process," she continued. "Of course," he said. "We can arrange a meeting at your convenience. There are several documents that will require your physical signature." "Send me the schedule," Sabrina said. "I'll confirm a time." There was a pause. "Understood," Cole replied. "There are also preliminary matters we should discuss regarding your father's existing investments. Some of them may intersect with entities you're already familiar with." Sabrina's expression did not change. "I'll review everything," she said. "Very well," Cole replied. The call ended. Sabrina placed the phone down carefully. She did not rush to open the laptop again. Instead, she took a moment to align the information she had already gathered. Daniel's company, its funding sources, the irregularities she had documented, the names that appeared in both sets of records. It was not a coincidence. It was a structure. And Sabrina now understood where she stood within it. That afternoon, while Ethan rested, she began organizing her files with greater precision. What had once been observation became preparation. She categorized financial records, aligned dates, cross-referenced transactions. She did not yet act on any of it. She did not need to. Not yet. Daniel still believed he was in control of the situation. He believed the divorce would proceed as he had planned. He believed Sabrina would accept the terms he offered. He believed the life he was building with Laya Monroe would continue without interruption. All of those beliefs depended on one assumption: that Sabrina remained exactly where he had left her. He did not know that she had already moved beyond that position. That evening, as the light faded and the apartment returned to its familiar quiet, Sabrina closed the final folder on her desk. She did not feel urgency. She did not feel anger. She felt clarity. The next steps were already defined, not by impulse, not by reaction, but by structure. And Sabrina had always understood structure better than Daniel ever had. She stood, turning off the light, and moved toward Ethan's room. He was awake, reading. "Can you sit with me?" he asked. Sabrina nodded. "Of course." She sat beside him, her presence steady, unchanged. Outside the room, the rest of the apartment remained still. Daniel had not yet returned. But he would. And when he did, he would bring papers he believed would end something. He would not yet understand that those papers marked the beginning of something else entirely. Sabrina already did. She just hadn't shown anyone yet. Daniel Hayes did not notice the exact moment he crossed from detachment into calculation. The shift had been gradual, layered over weeks of small decisions that felt justified at the time. By the time it became visible, it no longer felt like a choice to him. It felt like direction. Sabrina Washington recognized it immediately. It showed not only in what he said, but in what he stopped saying, the absence of certain questions, the disappearance of routine acknowledgments, the way he began to treat shared responsibilities as though that they had already been reassigned. By the second week after their conversation, Daniel no longer asked about Ethan's appointments at all. He did not inquire about progress. He did not check schedules. He did not adjust his own time to accommodate anything related to his son. Instead, he spoke in terms that framed everything as separate. "Your schedule," he said once, glancing briefly at Sabrina's notes on the kitchen counter. "Make sure it doesn't interfere with what we need to finalize." What we need. The phrase did not include Ethan. Sabrina noted that. She also noted the timing of Daniel's financial decisions. The joint account they had maintained for years began to change. Transfers that once occurred at predictable intervals became irregular. Amounts shifted. Certain expenses were delayed, others removed entirely. Sabrina did not react outwardly, but she began tracking everything more precisely. At 8:03 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, a transfer left the joint account smaller than what would draw immediate attention, but structured in a way that suggested intention. It was followed by 2 more transfers over the next 48 hours, each routed through different intermediary accounts. Sabrina identified the pattern. It was not random. It was dispersal. Daniel was moving funds. Not withdrawing them outright, but redistributing them in ways that would complicate retrieval later. He believed this was subtle. It was not. Sabrina accessed the account history through a secondary login Daniel had forgotten she retained. Years earlier, when they had first consolidated their finances, he had created multiple access points for convenience. He had never removed them. He had simply stopped thinking about them. That oversight now worked against him. Sabrina downloaded the transaction records. She did not alter anything. She did not interrupt the process. She documented. By midweek, a new element appeared. A payment directed toward a property management firm. The amount was larger than the others. The reference line included a partial address. Sabrina cross-referenced it within minutes. The property was not listed under Daniel's name. It was registered to a limited liability entity formed less than 2 months earlier. The managing agent listed was Laya Monroe. Sabrina paused not because the discovery was unexpected, but because it confirmed the progression. This was no longer an affair conducted in fragments. It was being structured into something more permanent. She opened a new file, entered the details, saved it. Then she moved on. Later that afternoon, Sabrina made a call. Attorney Grace Miller answered on the first ring. Grace Miller did not speak quickly. She did not fill silence unnecessarily. Her reputation, built over years of litigation and financial cases that rarely reached public attention, rested on her ability to listen longer than others expected. "Miss Washington," she said. "Yes," Sabrina replied. "I reviewed the preliminary materials you sent," Grace continued. "There's a pattern here." Sabrina did not respond immediately. "I want everything preserved exactly as it is," Grace added. "No interference, no confrontation." "That was already the plan," Sabrina said. There was a brief pause. "Good," Grace replied. "We'll need complete documentation. Bank records, transaction histories, any communication you have access to. The more precise, the better." "I have it," Sabrina said. "I assumed you would," Grace said. The tone carried no surprise, only acknowledgement. "There's another factor," Sabrina added. "His company." Grace's interest sharpened, though her voice remained steady. "Go on." Sabrina outlined what she had begun to piece together. The funding sources, the investor structures, the overlapping names that connected Daniel's company to entities now listed under the Washington estate. Grace listened without interruption. When Sabrina finished, there was a longer pause than before. "That complicates things," Grace said finally. "Or clarifies them," Sabrina replied. Grace considered that. "Yes," she said, "it does both." They spoke for another 20 minutes, not in broad terms, but in specifics. Documentation requirements, potential legal pathways, timing, everything centered on preparation, not action. When the call ended, Sabrina felt no urgency, only alignment. That evening, Daniel returned earlier than expected. He entered the apartment with a different energy than usual, less distracted, more focused. In his hand was a slim folder. He placed it on the table without ceremony. "These are the final documents," he said. Sabrina looked at the folder. She did not open it immediately. Ethan sat nearby working through another set of exercises. His movements were slower that day, his concentration deeper. Daniel glanced at him briefly, then back at Sabrina. "We should handle this now," he said. Sabrina stood. "Give me a moment," she replied. She moved to Ethan's side. "That's enough for tonight," she said gently. "You did well." Ethan looked up. "Are you going to talk about the grown-up things?" he asked. "Yes," Sabrina said. "Is it bad?" he asked. Sabrina held his gaze. "It's different," she said. He seemed to accept that. "Okay," he said, closing his workbook. Sabrina watched him move toward his room. Only when the door closed did she return to the table. Daniel was already seated, the folder open. Some papers arranged in a precise stack. "It's straightforward," he said. "Division of assets, custody terms, financial responsibilities." Sabrina took a seat across from him. She read. Not quickly, not slowly, at exactly the pace required to understand every detail. Daniel watched her, his expression controlled but attentive. He expected questions. He expected resistance. He expected something that would justify the firmness of his position. Sabrina gave him none of that. When she finished reading, she placed the papers back on the table. "The custody terms," she said. "You're not requesting shared responsibility." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "It's not practical," he said. "For you," Sabrina replied. Daniel didn't answer. "And the financial support," she continued. "This is significantly below standard." Daniel exhaled. "It reflects my current obligations," he said. Sabrina considered that. "Your new obligations," she said. He didn't deny it. "Yes." There was a pause. Sabrina reached for the pen. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Before you sign," he said, "you should understand that this is the most efficient way to handle things. If this becomes contested, it will take longer. It will be more complicated." Sabrina met his gaze. "I understand," she said. There was no hesitation in her voice, no uncertainty. She signed. The motion was smooth, deliberate. Daniel watched the pen move across the paper, his expression shifting in a way he did not fully control. Surprise, not at the act itself, but at the absence of resistance. "That's it?" he asked. Sabrina placed the pen down. "That's it," she said. Daniel sat back. For a moment he seemed to reassess something internally. Then he gathered the documents, closing the folder with a quiet final motion. "This will be filed tomorrow," he said. Sabrina nodded. "All right." He stood holding the folder at his side. "I'll be staying elsewhere tonight," he added. Sabrina did not respond. He lingered for a moment, as though expecting something more. When nothing came, he turned and left. The door closed behind him. The apartment returned to stillness. Sabrina remained at the table for a few seconds longer. Then she stood, moving to her desk. She opened her laptop. The files she had organized earlier were already in place. She added one more, a scanned copy of the signed documents. Then she closed the laptop. Not because she was finished, but because she had completed exactly what was required for that moment. Nothing more, nothing less. Across the apartment, Ethan shifted in his room. Sabrina turned off the light and walked toward him. The next phase had begun. Daniel believed he had just simplified his life. He believed he had removed what he no longer needed. What he did not understand was that in doing so, he had also removed himself from something he had never fully recognized. Sabrina already had. And she had signed the papers knowing exactly what would follow, not immediately, but inevitably. The hospital room was too bright for the hour. White light reflected off every surface, metal rails, polished floors, glass partitions, erasing shadows and leaving nothing concealed. It was the kind of environment designed for clarity, for precision, for decisions that could not afford ambiguity. Sabrina Washington stood beside Ethan's bed, her posture steady, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the rail. The monitors hummed softly, their rhythm consistent, reassuring, in a way that did not require attention. Ethan had been admitted the night before. It had not been sudden, but it had been serious enough that Sabrina had not hesitated. His breathing had become irregular during the evening, his body struggling in ways that required more than home care could provide. The emergency intake had been efficient. Doctors moved quickly. Nurses asked questions. Sabrina answered without delay. Now the immediate urgency had passed. Ethan slept. Sabrina remained. She had not left his side, except for brief conversations with medical staff. She had not called Daniel. There had been no reason to. At 9:42 a.m., the door opened. Daniel Hayes entered with the same controlled presence he carried into every room. His movements deliberate, his expression composed in a way that suggested he believed himself to be stepping into a situation he already understood. Behind him, the corridor remained visible for a moment. Figures passing, voices low, the quiet structure of a hospital, functioning without pause. Daniel closed the door. "You should have told me," he said. Sabrina did not turn immediately. "He's stable," she replied. Daniel stepped further into the room, his gaze shifting briefly to Ethan before returning to Sabrina. "That's not the point," he said. Sabrina turned, then meeting his eyes. "What is the point?" she asked. Daniel hesitated, not because he lacked an answer, but because the answer he intended to give did not align cleanly with the situation in front of him. "I have a right to know when something like this happens," he said finally. Sabrina considered that. "You've made it clear what you consider your responsibilities," she said. The words were not sharp. They were precise. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "That doesn't mean I'm not his father," he replied. Sabrina did not argue. She did not need to. Instead, she stepped aside slightly, allowing him a clearer view of Ethan. "He's been asking for you," she said. That was not entirely true. Ethan had asked once. But it was enough. Daniel approached the bed, his movements slower now, more measured. He looked down at his son, taking in the stillness, the controlled rise and fall of his breathing. For a moment, something shifted. Not enough to alter his course, but enough to register. Ethan stirred slightly, his eyes opening halfway. "Dad," he said, his voice soft. Daniel nodded. "Yeah," he replied. "I'm here." Ethan's gaze lingered on him for a second, then moved to Sabrina. "Are we going home today?" he asked. "Not yet," Sabrina said gently. "The doctors want to keep you a little longer." Ethan nodded, accepting the answer without question. Daniel stepped back. The moment passed. He adjusted his stance, the brief disruption already settling into something more familiar. "I brought the finalized copies," he said, reaching into his bag. Sabrina did not move. "This isn't the place," she said. Daniel glanced around the room. "It's as good a place as any," he replied. "We're both here. It's done." There was no hesitation in his tone, no acknowledgement of the setting beyond its convenience. Sabrina watched him for a moment longer. Then she nodded once. "Fine," she said. Daniel placed the folder on the small table beside the bed. The sound was quiet, but it carried. A nurse passing in the hallway slowed slightly, her gaze flicking toward the partially open door before continuing on. Inside the room, the air shifted. Daniel opened the folder, removing the documents with practiced efficiency. "These are the filed copies," he said. "Everything's been processed." Sabrina stepped closer, her movements calm, unhurried. She did not reach for the papers immediately. Instead, she looked at Daniel. "You chose this moment," she said. It was not a question. Daniel met her gaze. "It's efficient," he repeated. Sabrina held his eyes for a second longer. Then she took the documents. She read, not because she needed to confirm the contents, but because she understood the importance of the act itself. Daniel watched her, his posture steady, his confidence intact. He believed this was the final step, that once acknowledged, everything would move forward exactly as he had planned. Ethan shifted again, his attention drifting toward the papers. "What is that?" he asked. Sabrina lowered the documents slightly. "Nothing you need to worry about," she said. Ethan looked at Daniel. "Are you leaving?" he asked. The question settled into the room with a weight that did not belong to a child's voice. Daniel hesitated, only for a moment. "I'll still see you," he said. It was not an answer. Ethan seemed to understand that. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Sabrina finished reviewing the documents. She placed them back on the table. "I've already signed," she said. Daniel frowned slightly. "These are the finalized versions," he replied. "I know," Sabrina said. There was no confusion in her voice, only acknowledgement. Daniel studied her, something in his expression shifting again. "You're taking this well," he said. Sabrina did not respond to the observation. Instead, she reached for her phone. The screen lit briefly in her hand. A message remained open, unread by anyone else. Daniel's gaze flicked toward it, then back to her face. "What is that?" he asked. Sabrina did not show him. "Something I needed to see," she said. Daniel waited as though expecting elaboration. None came. The silence stretched. Not uncomfortable, not uncertain, just complete. A doctor entered the room, then breaking the moment. "Mr. Hayes," he said, glancing at Daniel. "We need to review a few things regarding Ethan's treatment plan." Daniel straightened slightly. Now he asked. "Yes," the doctor replied. Daniel looked at Sabrina, then back at the doctor. "Give me a minute," he said. The doctor nodded and stepped back into the hallway. Daniel turned to Sabrina again. "I'll come back," he said. Sabrina nodded. "Take your time." He hesitated for a second longer, then left the room. The door closed behind him. Sabrina remained where she was. The documents sat untouched on the table. Ethan watched her. "Mom," he said softly. Sabrina turned to him. "Yes, are we okay?" he asked. Sabrina moved to his side, placing her hand gently over his. "Yes," she said. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, only certainty. Ethan seemed to accept that. His eyes closed again, his breathing steadying. Sabrina stood there for a moment longer, her gaze shifting briefly to the phone still in her hand. The message remained, waiting. She did not open it again. She did not need to. She already knew what it contained. Outside the room, Daniel's voice carried faintly through the corridor, speaking with the doctor in measured tones, discussing treatment plans, timelines, logistics. He sounded composed, in control. He believed the structure of his life remained intact, that what he had ended in this room was complete. He did not understand that something else had already begun, something larger, something that did not require his awareness to move forward. Sabrina looked once more at Ethan, then at the door, then back at the stillness of the room. Everything appeared settled, controlled, final. But Sabrina knew better, because while Daniel believed he had closed a chapter in that hospital room, she had already stepped into the next one, and he had not even realized it yet. Sabrina Washington did not leave the hospital in a hurry. She never did anything in a hurry. Ethan was discharged 2 days after Daniel had placed the final documents on the table beside his bed. The doctors had stabilized his condition, adjusted his treatment plan, and provided a set of instructions Sabrina memorized before she even folded the papers into her bag. Daniel did not return. He sent a message instead. Brief, functional. A single line asking for updates, followed by another stating that he would be unavailable for the rest of the week. Sabrina read it once. She did not reply. The discharge process was quiet. A nurse assisted with the wheelchair, a doctor reviewed the final notes, and the hospital doors opened onto a morning that felt unchanged from any other. The city moved forward without interruption. Sabrina adjusted Ethan's jacket before guiding him toward the waiting car. "Are we going home?" he asked. Sabrina paused for a moment. Not the same one, she said. Ethan looked up at her. "Where are we going?" Sabrina met his gaze. "Somewhere quieter," she replied. He nodded slowly. That was enough for him. The car drove them across the city, away from the apartment Daniel still occupied, toward a building Sabrina had not entered in years. It stood on a quiet street lined with older trees, their branches stretching overhead in a way that softened the edges of the world below. The structure itself was understated, clean lines, secure entry, a presence that did not demand attention, but did not allow itself to be overlooked. Sabrina had keys. She had always had keys. She had simply never used them. Inside, the space was already prepared. Not recently, not in response to the hospital, but maintained continuously as though it had been waiting. A caretaker greeted them briefly, offering assistance. Sabrina declined. "Everything is in place," he said. "I know," Sabrina replied. Ethan looked around as they entered the living area, his eyes taking in the larger space, the quiet order of it. "This is ours?" he asked. Sabrina nodded. "For now," she said. He accepted that answer with the same calm he applied to everything else. Sabrina moved through the rooms methodically, not exploring, but confirming. She checked the bedroom, the bathroom, the storage areas. Everything aligned with what she remembered. Nothing had been left to chance. That afternoon, once Ethan was settled, Sabrina sat at the long table near the window and opened her laptop. The email from Harrison and Cole LLP had been updated. New attachments, new instructions, a scheduled meeting. She reviewed the details. Location, New York. Time 3 days from now. Participants, Jonathan Cole's senior partners, financial advisors. Sabrina closed the document. She did not hesitate. Instead, she opened a separate file. Daniel Hayes. His company. His financial structure. She began aligning the information with what she had already received from the estate. The connections were no longer subtle. They were direct. Daniel's company, Hayes Strategic Solutions, had grown rapidly over the past 3 years. Its expansion had been attributed to aggressive strategy, strong leadership, and favorable market conditions. But Sabrina now saw what Daniel had never examined closely enough to understand. The funding. It had come through layered investment channels, routed through entities designed to appear independent. Entities that now appeared in the Washington estate documentation. Her father's capital, her father's structure. supporting Daniel's success. Not intentionally for Daniel, but inevitably through the system he had built. Sabrina leaned back slightly. The realization was complete. Daniel had not built his company alone. He had built it on a foundation he did not recognize. And that foundation now belonged to her. She did not act on the information immediately. She did not contact Daniel. She did not inform anyone within his company. Instead, she opened another file. Audit preparation. She began listing the necessary steps. Internal review, external verification, legal positioning. Everything would be done correctly. Not quickly, not emotionally. Correctly. That evening, as the light shifted and the room settled into a softer tone, Ethan called from the bedroom. Mom Sabrina closed the laptop and walked in. Yes, he looked smaller in the larger bed, his frame adjusting to the new space. "Will Dad come here?" he asked. Sabrina paused. "No," she said. Ethan absorbed that. "Okay," he replied. There was no anger in his voice, no confusion, just acceptance. Sabrina sat beside him. "Do you need anything?" she asked. He shook his head. "Just stay for a minute," he said. Sabrina nodded. "I will." She sat with him until his breathing slowed, until his eyes closed. Only then did she stand and return to the living area. Her phone vibrated once on the table. A message. From Daniel. "We need to finalize the asset transfers. Let me know when you're available." Sabrina read it. Then placed the phone back down. She did not respond. Not because she intended to ignore it, but because she would respond at the appropriate time, on her terms. The next morning, Sabrina made another call. Jonathan Cole answered again. "Miss Washington, I'll be there," Sabrina said. "Excellent," he replied. "We'll finalize the transfer and review the portfolio in detail." "There's something else," Sabrina added. A brief pause. "Go on." "There are overlapping interests between the estate and a private firm I'm familiar with," she said. Cole did not respond immediately. "Send me the details," he said finally. "I will," Sabrina replied. The call ended. Sabrina opened her laptop again. She attached the relevant files: Daniel's company, transaction records, investment links. She sent them. Then she closed the laptop. Outside, the city moved as it always did. Unaware, unchanged. Inside the quiet apartment, Sabrina stood near the window, her reflection faint in the glass. Everything was aligned now. Not just emotionally, not just personally, structurally, legally, financially. Daniel believed he was moving forward, building a new life, securing his future. He did not yet understand that the structure supporting that future was already shifting, not violently, not suddenly, but inevitably. Sabrina did not need to confront him. She did not need to argue. She did not need to explain. The system would do that for her. And when it did, it would not raise its voice. It would simply present the truth. In documents, in numbers, in decisions that could not be undone. Sabrina turned away from the window. There was still work to do. But for the first time since the hospital, everything felt defined. Not uncertain, not fragile, defined. And Daniel Hayes, without realizing it, had already placed himself exactly where that definition would reach him. He just hadn't seen it yet. The offices of Harrison and Cole LLP did not attempt to impress. They did not need to. Located on the upper floors of a glass tower in Manhattan, the firm occupied a space that prioritized discretion over display. Clean lines, muted tones, rooms designed to hold conversations that did not require witnesses. Sabrina Washington arrived exactly on time. Not early, not late. She entered without hesitation, her movements calm, her presence unannounced, beyond the necessary formalities at the front desk. The receptionist recognized her name immediately. No surprise showed on her face, only a quiet shift in posture that signaled recognition of significance. "Miss Washington," she said, "they're expecting you." Sabrina nodded. She was escorted through a corridor that absorbed sound, past closed doors and controlled spaces, until they reached a conference room at the end. Jonathan Cole stood as she entered. He was older than his voice suggested, mid-50s, composed with the kind of expression that rarely revealed more than it intended to. Two other individuals sat at the table, a financial advisor and a senior partner whose name Sabrina had already memorized from the documents. Miss Washington, Cole said. Sabrina took a seat. There was no exchange of pleasantries, only acknowledgement. "We'll begin with verification," Cole said, sliding a folder across the table. Sabrina reviewed the documents. Identity confirmation, signature matching, formal acceptance of the estate transfer. Each step was executed without pause, without deviation. She signed where required, initialed where necessary, her handwriting precise and consistent. No one interrupted. No one explained what she already understood. When the final document was completed, Cole closed the folder. "It's official," he said. "Effective immediately, all controlling interests transfer to you." Sabrina nodded once. There was no visible reaction, no shift in posture, only acceptance. The financial advisor spoke next. "We've prepared an overview of the current portfolio," he said, activating a screen embedded in the wall. "There are several areas that require your immediate attention." Sabrina watched. Not the presentation itself, but the structure beneath it. Data flowed across the screen: investment allocations, performance metrics, projected growth. Numbers organized in a way that suggested stability, but with underlying complexities that required careful navigation. "Most of the holdings are stable," the advisor continued. "However, there are a few entities that intersect with external operations in ways that may require review." Sabrina spoke for the first time since the verification process ended. "I've already identified one," she said. The room shifted slightly. "Go on," Cole said. Sabrina opened her folder, not the one they had provided, her own. Inside were documents she had prepared over the past weeks. She placed them on the table. "Hayes Strategic Solutions," she said. Cole's expression did not change, but his attention sharpened. Sabrina continued. "The company has received funding through multiple channels over the past 3 years. Those channels trace back to entities currently listed within the estate." The financial advisor leaned forward slightly. "That's not immediately unusual," he said. "Large portfolios often have indirect exposure." "This isn't indirect," Sabrina said. She slid a document across the table. "Trace the sequence." The advisor did. His expression shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. "These transfers," he said. "Yes," Sabrina replied. Cole remained silent, reviewing the materials with measured focus. "Who currently controls Hayes Strategic Solutions?" he asked. "Daniel Hayes," Sabrina said. The name settled into the room. Cole looked up. "And your relationship to him?" he asked. Sabrina met his gaze. "We finalized our divorce 2 days ago," she said. There was no reaction, not from Cole, not from the others. But the context adjusted. "Understood," Cole said. He closed the document, aligning it carefully with the others. "This changes the situation," he continued. "It clarifies it," Sabrina replied. Cole considered that. "Yes," he said, "it does." The financial advisor spoke again. "If the funding originates from estate-controlled entities, then Hayes Strategic Solutions is effectively operating on capital you now oversee." "Correct," Sabrina said. "And if there are irregularities in how that capital has been used," he continued. Sabrina did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Cole did. "Then we have grounds for a formal audit," he said. The word did not carry weight in his tone, but its implication did. Sabrina nodded. "I want it done properly," she said. "It will be," Cole replied. There was a pause. Then Sabrina added one more detail. "There are personal transactions as well," she said. "Funds redirected, accounts structured to avoid direct traceability." Cole's gaze remained steady. "Do you have documentation?" he asked. Sabrina slid another set of papers forward. "I do." Cole reviewed them. The room remained silent. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that needed to be said was already in the documents. When he finished, Cole closed the file. "We'll proceed with a full internal review," he said. Quietly. Sabrina nodded. "That's the intention," she said. The meeting continued for another hour, not in broad discussions, but in precise steps. Audit procedures, legal positioning, communication strategies. Everything was structured to ensure that when action was taken, it would not require explanation. It would require compliance. When the meeting ended, Cole stood. "We'll keep you informed at every stage," he said. Sabrina rose as well. "I expect that," she replied. There was no handshake, no formal closing, only acknowledgement. Sabrina left the office the same way she had entered, quietly, without drawing attention. Outside, the city moved with its usual rhythm. Traffic, voices, motion. None of it reflected what had just been set in motion. Back in Denver, Daniel Hayes stood in his office reviewing a set of projections on his screen. Laya Monroe sat across from him, her posture relaxed, her expression confident. "This is the right time to expand," she said. "We've got momentum," Daniel nodded. "I agree," he said. He believed it. The numbers supported it. Growth curves, revenue streams. Everything aligned with the future he had planned. He did not question the foundation beneath those numbers. He did not examine the origin of the capital that sustained them. He did not consider that the structure supporting his company had already shifted. His phone vibrated. A notification. He glanced at it briefly. An automated message from one of the financial institutions his company worked with. Routine. He dismissed it. Lila leaned forward slightly. "We should also finalize the property purchase this week," she said, "before anything changes." Daniel nodded again. "Do it," he said. He did not ask what might change. He assumed nothing would. Across the country, Sabrina Washington stepped into a car waiting outside the firm's building. She did not check her phone. She did not review the documents again. She had already done what was necessary. The rest would follow. Not because she forced it, but because the system once set in motion did not require force. It required structure. And that structure now belonged to her. Daniel Hayes believed he was building something new. He believed he had moved beyond what no longer served him. He believed he had control. What he did not understand was that control had already shifted. Not visibly, not yet, but completely. And when it surfaced, it would not ask for his permission. It would simply present itself. In numbers, in documents, in decisions that could not be reversed. Sabrina did not need to be present for that moment. But she would be, when it mattered. The audit did not announce itself. It began as a request. Routine on the surface, structured in language that suggested compliance rather than suspicion. Hayes Strategic Solutions received the notification on a Monday morning at 8:17 a.m., delivered through official channels Daniel Hayes had grown accustomed to trusting. Subject: Internal Financial Review Documentation Request. Daniel read it once. Then again, his expression did not change immediately, not in a way anyone else would notice. But something in his posture shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible. Across the desk, Laya Monroe leaned forward slightly. "What is it?" she asked. Daniel turned the screen toward her. "Routine audit," he said. Lila scanned the email, her brow tightening just enough to suggest concern. "From who?" she asked. Daniel hesitated for a fraction of a second. "One of the parent investment entities," he replied. "That's never happened before," she said. Daniel exhaled slowly. "It's standard procedure," he said. "Large firms do this when portfolios expand." The explanation was correct, but incomplete. Lila leaned back, considering. "Do we need to prepare anything?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "We're already compliant," he said. He believed that, not entirely, but enough. The email listed specific requests, transaction records, internal communications related to financial decisions, documentation of fund allocations across departments. It was detailed, more detailed than previous reviews. Daniel noted that. But he did not question it further. Instead, he forwarded the email to his finance team with a short instruction. "Handle this. Priority." The response came quickly. Acknowledgement, compliance, movement. Within hours, files began to circulate. Data compiled, records organized. The process appeared controlled, efficient. But beneath that surface, small inconsistencies began to emerge. Not immediately, not clearly, but enough. By midday, Daniel received a message from his senior accountant. "We need to review a few transactions before submission." Daniel frowned. "What transactions?" he asked, when the accountant stepped into his office minutes later. The man closed the door behind him, his expression careful. "Some of the transfers from Q3, he said. "They don't align cleanly with the stated allocations." Daniel leaned back slightly. "Explain," he said. The accountant placed a folder on the desk. "These," he said, opening it. Daniel scanned the pages. Numbers, dates, routing paths. At first glance, nothing unusual. But as he looked closer, the structure became less clear. "These were strategic reallocations," Daniel said. The accountant nodded. "Possibly," he replied. "But the documentation doesn't fully support that." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then update the documentation," he said. The accountant hesitated. "It's not that simple," he said. Daniel looked up. "Why not?" The accountant chose his words carefully. "Because some of these funds were moved through intermediary accounts that aren't directly tied to our operational structure," he said. Daniel's expression hardened. "They're tied to me," he said. The accountant nodded again. "Yes," he said. "But that distinction may not hold under review." Silence settled between them. Not heavy, but precise. Daniel closed the folder. "Fix it," he said. The accountant did not move. "We can organize the records," he said, "but we can't change the underlying transactions." Daniel's gaze sharpened. "Then present them in a way that makes sense," he replied. The accountant understood what that meant. He also understood the limits. "I'll do what I can," he said. He left the office quietly. Daniel remained seated. For a moment, he did not move. Then his phone vibrated. A message from Lila. "We need to talk." He looked up as she entered without knocking. "Is there a problem?" she asked. Daniel gestured toward the folder. "Minor discrepancies," he said. "Nothing serious." Lila stepped closer, glancing at the documents. "These are the transfers for the property," she said. Daniel nodded. "And others," he added. Lila's expression shifted. "Are they going to question them?" she asked. Daniel leaned back again. "They can question whatever they want," he said. "We have explanations." Lila studied him. "Do we?" she asked. Daniel did not respond immediately. Instead, he reached for his phone, scrolling through recent messages, confirmations, approvals. Everything had seemed clear when it was happening. Now, under review, the structure felt less defined. "They won't escalate this," he said finally. Lila didn't look convinced. Maybe not, she said. But we should be careful. Daniel's tone sharpened slightly. I am careful, he said. Lila held his gaze. Then we should stay that way, she replied. The conversation ended there. Not resolved, but paused. By late afternoon, the second email arrived. Subject: additional documentation required. Daniel opened it immediately. The requests were more specific this time. Clarifications on particular transactions. Detailed breakdowns of fund movements. Supporting documentation for transfers previously categorized under general expenses. Daniel read through it slowly. This was no longer routine. He felt it. Not in the language, but in the focus. They were looking at something. Closely. He forwarded the email again. This time with a different instruction. Immediate review. No delays. Across the office, the atmosphere shifted. Subtle at first, then more visible. Staff moved with increased urgency. Conversations lowered. Doors closed more frequently. Lila watched it all from her desk, her confidence beginning to fracture at the edges. She stood and walked back into Daniel's office. This isn't just routine, she said. Daniel did not argue. He couldn't. Not anymore. They're digging, she added. Daniel nodded once. Yes, he said. Lila crossed her arms. Why, she asked. Daniel looked at the screen, at the numbers, at the structure he had built. They always do when there's growth, he said. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't enough. Not this time. Something else was driving the audit. Something beyond standard procedure. He just didn't know what. And for the first time since the process began, uncertainty settled into the space he had been operating in with confidence. It was small, but it was there. And it would not go away. Across the country, Sabrina Washington reviewed the same data from a different perspective. Not as someone being questioned, but as someone who already knew the answers. The documents Daniel struggled to explain were already organized in front of her. Aligned, verified, complete. She did not rush. She did not react. She simply observed the process unfolding exactly as it was designed to. Daniel Hayes believed he was managing a complication, a temporary disruption, something that could be corrected. What he did not understand was that the system reviewing him had already reached its conclusions. It was not searching for answers, it was confirming them. And once confirmed, it would not need to ask again. Sabrina closed the file. The next step was already in motion. She did not need to initiate it. She had already done that. Now she only needed to wait. Because when the structure began to shift visibly, it would not happen gradually. It would happen all at once. And Daniel Hayes would not be prepared for it. Not because he lacked intelligence, but because he had never understood the foundation he was standing on. Until now. By Wednesday morning, Hayes Strategic Solutions no longer felt like the same company Daniel Hayes had walked into just days earlier. Nothing visible had changed at first glance. The offices remained polished. Meetings still filled the calendar. Conversations continued in measured tones. But beneath that surface, something had shifted, subtle, precise, and impossible to ignore once noticed. The audit had moved beyond requests. It had become presence. At 9:02 a.m., 2 representatives from the external review team arrived without prior notice. Their credentials were verified within minutes. Their access was granted without resistance. They did not introduce themselves to Daniel immediately. They did not need to. Their authority was already established through the documentation that had preceded them. Daniel watched from his office as they moved through the floor, their interactions minimal, their focus direct. They spoke to department heads, requested files, reviewed systems. Every action was deliberate. Every movement suggested preparation. This was not exploration. It was execution. Laya Monroe stood beside him, her arms crossed, her gaze following the reviewers as they moved. "This isn't normal," she said quietly. Daniel did not respond. He was reading the latest email on his screen. Subject: temporary access expansion authorized. The language was clinical, unemotional, final. He understood what it meant. "They have full access now," he said. Lila turned to him. Full access to what she asked. Daniel's eyes remained on the screen. "Everything," he replied. The words settled into the room with a weight that neither of them acknowledged out loud. Across the office, the finance department had gone silent. Not completely, but enough. Conversations were shorter, movements more contained. Screens remained open longer than usual, data displayed in ways that suggested ongoing review rather than routine work. At 10:17 a.m., Daniel received a request. Not from the audit team, from the board. Emergency meeting. 10 p.m. attendance required. Daniel leaned back in his chair, reading the message twice. The board did not call emergency meetings without cause. He knew that. Lila watched him. "What is it?" she asked. Daniel turned the screen toward her. Her expression shifted immediately. "They're reacting already," she said. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have one. By 12:58 p.m., the conference room was full. Board members sat in their usual positions, their posture composed, their expressions controlled. At the far end of the table, a representative from the audit team stood beside a screen displaying a series of documents. Daniel took his seat. Lila was not invited. She remained outside. The meeting began without introduction. "This session has been convened to address findings from the ongoing financial review," the lead board member said. His voice was steady, neutral. Daniel listened. He did not interrupt. On the screen, the first set of documents appeared. Transaction records, dates, amounts, routing paths. Daniel recognized them immediately. These transactions, the audit representative said, have been identified as inconsistent with the declared operational allocations of the company. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "They were strategic reallocations," he said. The representative did not respond to the explanation. Instead, he moved to the next slide. More records, more details, connections, patterns. Each one layered over the last until the structure became clear. Not just irregular, systematic. Daniel's jaw tightened. "We'll need full clarification on each of these," the board member said. Daniel nodded once. "You'll have it," he replied. The representative continued. "These transactions also intersect with external entities," he said. "Entities that fall under a broader investment structure currently under new management." Daniel's attention sharpened. "What entities?" he asked. The representative paused, then displayed the next document. Names, organizations, structures. Daniel read them. Once. Then again. Something shifted. Not visibly, but internally. "These are standard investment channels," he said. The representative did not argue. "They are controlled channels," he replied. The distinction was precise. Daniel understood it immediately. But he did not respond. The board member leaned forward. "We need to understand your position in relation to these structures," he said. Daniel held his gaze. "I'm the CEO of this company," he said. "That's not what we're asking," the board member replied. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable, not uncertain, just exact. At 1:43 p.m., the meeting adjourned. No decisions were announced. No conclusions stated. But the direction was clear. Daniel left the room without speaking to anyone. Outside, Layla stood as he approached. "What happened?" she asked. Daniel did not slow down. "They're escalating," he said. Layla followed him. Based on what she pressed, Daniel stopped, turned to her. "Everything," he said. Layla stared at him. For the first time since the process began, her confidence cracked completely. "What do we do?" she asked. Daniel looked away, not because he didn't want to answer, but because he didn't have one. Back in his office, he closed the door, sat down, and for the first time he opened the full financial structure of his company, not the summaries, not the projections, but the underlying framework. He traced the funding, the sources, the paths, and slowly, methodically, the realization formed. Not all at once, but enough. The capital that had fueled his expansion, the growth he had attributed to strategy, the stability he had assumed was his own. It connected to something larger, something he had never fully examined. His phone vibrated. A message. Unknown number. He opened it. "We need to discuss your company's position within the Washington portfolio. Contact Harrison and Cole LLP immediately." Daniel stared at the screen. The name settled into place. Washington. He had heard it before. From Sabrina. Years ago. Dismissed it. Minimized it. Now it stood in front of him, not as a name, but as a structure, as authority, as something he was now positioned beneath. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. Across the room, the city continued, as it always had. Unaware, unchanged. But inside that office, something had shifted completely. Not gradually, not subtly, but irreversibly. And for the first time, Daniel Hayes understood that whatever was happening was no longer within his control. He just didn't yet understand how far beyond it he had already fallen. The boardroom did not change. The same long table, the same controlled lighting, the same arrangement of seats that had for years reinforced a structure Daniel Hayes believed he understood. But the balance within it had shifted. Not visibly. Not yet. Daniel arrived 10 minutes early. He had not slept. The hours between the previous afternoon and that morning had been spent reviewing documents that no longer aligned with his assumptions. Financial structures that had once appeared straightforward now revealed layers he had never questioned. Names he had overlooked now carried weight. Washington. The message from Harrison and Cole LLP had not been a suggestion. It had been a directive. He had not responded, not immediately. Instead, he had tried to understand the position he was now in. By the time he entered the boardroom, he knew one thing with certainty. The audit was not about discrepancies. It was about control. Board members entered one by one, their expressions unchanged, their movements precise. No one spoke more than necessary. No one acknowledged the shift that had already taken place. At 9:00 a.m., the final seat at the far end of the table remained empty. Daniel noticed it. He knew who typically occupied that position, the representative from the primary investment group, the one who rarely attended in person. Today, the seat remained unclaimed. At 9:03 a.m., the door opened. Sabrina Washington entered. She did not pause at the threshold. She did not scan the room. She walked directly to the empty seat and took it. No introduction was made. No announcement followed. But every person in the room adjusted, subtly, instinctively. Daniel remained still, not because he was composed, but because movement in that moment would have revealed too much. Sabrina placed a folder on the table, not thick, not excessive. Just enough. The board chair spoke first. This session has been reconvened to address the findings of the audit and to clarify ownership structures relevant to Hayes' strategic solutions. His tone was measured, neutral, but it carried a different weight than before. He turned slightly toward Sabrina. "Miss Washington," he said. That was all. No title, no explanation, just the name. Sabrina opened the folder. Inside were documents Daniel had not seen before. She did not distribute them immediately. Instead, she spoke. Hayes Strategic Solutions has operated on capital sourced through a network of investment entities, she said. Those entities are now under my control. Her voice was steady, unemotional, precise. The words did not rise. They did not need to. Daniel felt the shift in the room, not because of what was said, but because of how it was received. No one questioned it. No one asked for clarification. The assumption of authority had already been accepted. Sabrina slid the documents across the table. They outlined the structure, she said. Board members reviewed them in silence. The audit representative stood beside the screen, ready but not speaking. Daniel looked at the pages. He did not rush. He read them slowly. Each line confirmed what he had begun to understand the night before. The funding, the ownership, the control. All of it traced back to a single point: Sabrina. He looked up. Their eyes met for the first time in that room. She did not look away. There was no anger in her expression, no satisfaction, only clarity. The board chair spoke again. Based on these findings, we need to address the operational integrity of the company, he said. The audit representative stepped forward. Multiple transactions have been identified as inconsistent with the intended use of the capital provided through these entities, he said. Daniel leaned forward slightly. I've already provided explanations for those transactions, he said. The representative nodded. You've provided context, he replied, not justification. The distinction was exact. Daniel's jaw tightened. They were strategic decisions, he said. Sabrina spoke again. They were personal reallocations, she said. Daniel turned to her. That's not accurate, he said. Sabrina did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She reached for another document. Then explain this, she said, sliding it toward him. Daniel looked down. It was a detailed breakdown of the property purchase. The entity, the funding path, the timing, all of it aligned, all of it complete. He did not respond immediately, because there was no way to adjust the facts. They were temporary, he said finally. Sabrina held his gaze. They were undocumented, she replied. Silence followed. Not heavy, not dramatic, just final. The board chair exhaled slowly. Given the findings, he said, we have to consider immediate action. Daniel looked at him. What kind of action, he asked. The answer came from the audit representative. Suspension of executive authority pending full review, he said. The words were delivered without emphasis, but their impact was absolute. Daniel sat back. For a moment, he said nothing. Not because he accepted it, but because he understood the structure behind it. This is based on incomplete information, he said. Sabrina spoke again. It's based on documented transactions, she said. Daniel looked at her. For the first time, something close to recognition appeared in his expression. Not of her position, but of what he had failed to see. You knew, he said. Sabrina did not respond to the statement. She did not confirm it. She did not deny it. She simply remained still. That was enough. The board chair continued. Until the review is complete, operational control will be reassigned, he said. Daniel's focus sharpened again. To who, he asked. The answer was already clear. But he asked anyway. The board chair turned slightly. To the primary controlling interest, he said. He did not need to say her name. The room already had. Sabrina closed the folder. Not abruptly, not slowly, just completely. There's no need for disruption, she said. The structure remains intact. Only the oversight changes. Her tone did not shift. It did not harden. It remained exactly as it had been from the beginning. Calm, certain. The meeting ended shortly after. Not because everything had been resolved, but because everything had been defined. Daniel remained seated as the others stood. Documents gathered, chairs moved. The room began to clear. Sabrina stood. She did not approach him. She did not address him directly. She simply turned and walked toward the door. Daniel watched her, not with anger, not with confusion, but with something more precise. Understanding. Not complete, not yet, but enough. Enough to recognize that what had happened was not sudden, not accidental. It had been building. Quietly, deliberately, while he had been focused elsewhere. The door closed behind her. The room returned to stillness. Daniel remained where he was. For the first time, he did not reach for his phone. He did not look for explanations. He did not attempt to adjust the situation, because he understood something now that he had not understood before. Control had not been taken from him in that room. It had been removed long before he walked into it. He had just arrived too late to see when it happened. The building still carried Daniel Hayes' name on the internal directory. For 2 days after the board meeting, nothing visible changed. His office remained intact. His access badge still opened doors. His email account continued to receive messages, though their tone had shifted more formal, more cautious, as if every word now passed through an invisible filter before reaching him. From the outside, it appeared as though the company was simply pausing. Internally, it was reorganizing. Daniel sat at his desk on Thursday morning, the city stretching out beneath the glass wall behind him. He had not returned to his usual routines. Meetings were canceled or reassigned. Decisions that once moved through him now bypassed him entirely. He was still present, but no longer central. He opened his inbox again. There were messages from legal, from finance, from the board. Each one structured carefully, each one confirming what had already been stated in the meeting. Temporary suspension of executive authority. Full cooperation required during ongoing review. Restrictions applied to financial access and external communications. Daniel read them without reacting. He had already understood. What remained now was consequence. At 9:26 a.m., his office door opened. Laya Monroe entered without knocking. She had not slept either. The confidence that had once defined her posture was gone, replaced by something more rigid, more controlled. "They've locked me out of the system," she said. Daniel looked up. Since when, he asked. "This morning," she replied. "I can't access the project files or the financial dashboards." Daniel nodded once. "It's part of the review," he said. Lila stepped further into the room. "This isn't just a review," she said. "They're isolating us." Daniel did not argue. He didn't need to. "They've also flagged the property transaction," she continued. "The one we discussed." Daniel leaned back slightly. "I expected that," he said. Lila stared at him. "You expected this?" she asked. Daniel met her gaze. "I expected scrutiny," he said. "Not this level." Lila crossed her arms. "What are we supposed to do?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately, because for the first time, the question did not have a clear response. "Nothing," he said finally. Lila blinked. "Nothing," she repeated. "For now," Daniel clarified. Lila's expression hardened. "That's not a plan," she said. Daniel exhaled slowly. "No," he replied. "It's reality." Silence settled between them. Not the kind that invited resolution, the kind that marked its absence. Lila turned away first. "I didn't sign up for this," she said quietly. Daniel did not respond. She paused at the door, then looked back. "Do you even know what's happening?" she asked. Daniel held her gaze. "Yes," he said. It was not entirely true, but it was closer than anything else he could say. Lila left without another word. The door closed. Daniel remained seated. Across the desk, The folder from the board meeting sat exactly where he had placed it the day before. He opened it again, not because he needed to review the contents, but because he needed to see them. The structure, the documentation, the clarity with which everything had been presented. There had been no accusation, no raised voices, no attempt to humiliate, only facts, numbers, ownership. That had been enough. At 11:14 a.m., another email arrived. This one from Harrison and Cole, LLP. Subject, formal notice asset review and compliance requirements. Daniel opened it. The language was more direct than before. It outlined his obligations under the current review. Full disclosure of financial activity, cooperation with audit procedures, restrictions on asset movement. Failure to comply would result in further legal action. Daniel read the final line twice. All actions are being conducted under the authority of the Washington estate. He closed the email. The name no longer felt distant. It no longer belonged to something abstract. It was present, active, defining the parameters of his situation. And it was tied directly and completely to Sabrina. At 1:32 p.m. security arrived. Not abruptly, not aggressively. Two individuals in standard corporate attire, their presence professional, their tone controlled. Mr. Hayes, one of them said, "We need to update your access credentials." Daniel stood. He did not argue. He handed over his badge. The process took less than a minute. When it was done, the doors that had once opened without resistance would no longer respond. "Your personal belongings will be forwarded," the second individual added. Daniel nodded. "Understood," he said. There was no confrontation, no scene, just completion. He left the office without looking back. The elevator ride down was quiet. No one spoke. No one needed to. Outside, the air felt different. Not heavier, not lighter, just unfamiliar. Daniel stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the city moving around him unchanged. His phone vibrated. Another message. From Lila. "They've suspended my position, effective immediately." Daniel read it, then placed the phone back in his pocket. There was nothing to respond with. Nothing that would alter the situation. Across the city, in a quieter part of Denver, Sabrina Washington sat near the window of the apartment she had chosen. Ethan rested in the next room, his breathing steady, his condition stable. The laptop in front of her displayed a series of updates. Audit progress, legal confirmations, structural adjustments within Hayes' strategic solutions. Each one aligned with the process she had initiated, each one unfolding without deviation. She did not intervene. She did not accelerate anything. She simply observed. A notification appeared, "Executive access revoked." Daniel Hayes' Sabrina read it, then moved on to the next file. There was no satisfaction in the action, no sense of completion, only continuation. The system was doing what it was designed to do. Correcting, realigning, not punishing, not reacting, just functioning. Later that evening, Sabrina walked into Ethan's room. He was awake looking out the window. "Did something happen?" he asked. Sabrina sat beside him. "Yes," she said. "Is it bad?" he asked. Sabrina considered the question, then answered carefully. "It's finished," she said. Ethan looked at her. "Finished," he repeated. Sabrina nodded. "The part that needed to end," she said. Ethan seemed to think about that. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. Sabrina stayed with him until he fell asleep. When she returned to the living area, the city lights reflected softly against the glass. Everything was quiet. Not empty, not uncertain, just settled. Daniel Hayes had lost his position, his access, his structure, not through confrontation, not through conflict, but through process. through the same systems he had relied on without fully understanding. Sabrina closed her laptop. There was nothing more to review that night. The final steps would complete themselves. Not because she forced them, but because they had already been set in motion. She turned off the light and stood for a moment in the quiet space. There was no need to look back. Nothing there required her attention anymore. What remained was forward, and Sabrina had already moved there. Without noise, without announcement, without leaving anything unfinished. The final documents arrived without urgency. They were delivered electronically at 8:06 a.m. on a quiet Monday, the subject line. Simple, unembellished, final determination. Hayes Strategic Solutions Review. Sabrina Washington opened the file at the same table where she had reviewed every other stage of the process. The light outside was soft filtered through the branches that lined the street below. Ethan was still asleep. She read the document once, then again, not because it was unclear, but because clarity in matters like this required precision. The conclusions were direct. Daniel Hayes had been formally removed from all executive roles within Hayes Strategic Solutions. His authority had been permanently revoked. Legal proceedings regarding misallocation of funds would proceed separately structured through civil channels rather than public escalation. The company itself would remain intact, reorganized, stabilized. Oversight transferred fully to the controlling investment entity, to her. Sabrina closed the document. She did not react, not outwardly. There was no shift in her posture, no visible acknowledgement of what had been finalized. Because in truth, it had been finalized long before the document arrived. This was only confirmation. In another part of the city, Daniel Hayes sat in a temporary office space he had secured days earlier. It was smaller, functional, devoid of the quiet authority his previous office had carried. He had not returned to Hayes Strategic Solutions since his access had been revoked. He had not attempted to. There had been no point. The message was clear, final. He opened the same document, read it, then set the device down. For a long time he did not move, not because he was in shock, but because the process of understanding had already taken place. What remained now was acceptance. Not immediate, not complete, but present. His phone rested on the desk beside him. No new messages, no calls. The network that had once responded instantly to his decisions had gone quiet. Not hostile, not reactive, just absent. Laya Monroe had sent one final message 2 days earlier. I need to focus on my own situation. He had not replied. There had been nothing to say. The structure they had built together, personal and professional, had not dissolved dramatically. It had simply stopped functioning. Daniel stood and walked to the window. The view was narrower, more contained. The city still moved beyond it, unchanged. He watched for a moment, then turned away. Across the city, Sabrina closed her laptop and stood. The day ahead was already structured. Ethan had a follow-up appointment, a new therapy schedule to review, meetings to attend remotely. None of it felt different from what she had been doing before. Only the context had changed. She walked into Ethan's room. He was awake, sitting up, his attention focused on a book resting against his knees. "Morning," she said. He looked up. "Morning," he replied. Sabrina moved closer, adjusting the blanket slightly. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Better," he said. She nodded. "That's good." He watched her for a moment. "Is everything done?" he asked. Sabrina considered the question. "Yes," she said. Ethan seemed to process that. "Does that mean things are going to be different?" he asked. Sabrina sat beside him. "Yes," she said. He looked down at his hands. "Is that okay?" he asked. Sabrina reached for his hand, her touch steady. "It is," she said. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, only truth. Ethan nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. That was enough. Later that morning, Sabrina joined a scheduled call with the advisory team overseeing the transition of the Washington portfolio. Jonathan Cole's voice came through clearly. "The restructuring is complete," he said. "All entities are aligned under your direction." Sabrina listened, not for information she didn't have, but for confirmation. "There are a few remaining administrative steps," Cole continued. "But nothing that requires immediate attention." Sabrina nodded, though he could not see it. "Proceed as planned," she said. "Of course," he replied. The call ended. Sabrina did not linger. She moved to the next item on her list. There was no sense of culmination, no moment that demanded reflection, because for her, this had never been about reaching an end. It had been about maintaining control of the process. And that control had been established quietly long before anyone else recognized it. That afternoon, she signed one final document. It was not large, not complex. A standard authorization confirming the final transition of oversight for Hayes Strategic Solutions. Her signature completed it. She placed the pen down. The action was simple, but complete. Across the country, Daniel received a notification confirming the same. He did not open it. He did not need to. He already knew. The structure he had built his life around had shifted entirely, not through confrontation, not through conflict, but through a process he had underestimated. He sat down again, the room quiet around him. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider something he had avoided, not what had happened, but how. Sabrina had not argued. She had not resisted. She had not attempted to stop him. She had simply moved, quietly, deliberately, until the outcome was inevitable. Daniel exhaled slowly. There was no anger in the realization, only clarity. Across the city, Sabrina stood near the window once more. The light had changed slightly, the afternoon settling into a softer tone. Ethan's laughter drifted faintly from the other room, a small, steady sound that carried more weight than anything else. Sabrina watched the reflection of the city in the glass, not searching for anything, not expecting anything, just present. She did not look back. There was nothing behind her that required attention. Everything that had needed to end had ended. Everything that needed to continue already had. Without noise, without display, without leaving anything unresolved. Sabrina Washington turned away from the window and walked toward the next part of her day. Not as someone who had won, not as someone who had taken anything, but as someone who had simply allowed the truth to complete itself, and then moved forward. Some endings do not arrive with raised voices or visible conflict. They do not announce themselves or demand acknowledgement. Instead, they unfold quietly, shaped by decisions made long before anyone else understands their direction. Sabrina Washington never needed to prove anything out loud. She did not respond to humiliation with anger, nor did she chase control once it was taken from her. She observed. She documented. She waited. And when the moment came, she did not create the outcome. She simply allowed it to reveal itself through truth, through structure, through the systems already in place. What happened to Daniel Hayes was not sudden. It was not revenge. It was the natural result of choices made without understanding the foundation beneath them. And perhaps that is where the real lesson lives. Not in what was lost, but in what was always there unseen. If you've stayed with this story until the end, you've seen how silence can hold more power than reaction. I'd be curious to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? And if stories like this resonate with you, stories about quiet strength, about truth revealing itself when the time is right, you may want to stay for the next one. There are always more stories waiting to be told.